Trust is the critical element in classrooms that thrive, and we will have vibrant and engaged learners in classrooms that thrive. So what does that mean? What does that word thrive mean? It means grow or develop vigorously, strong, prosper, and flourish. And when you're connected to your purpose, when you know who you are and what you want to be, your learning thrives naturally if you're given that opportunity. And at the core of classrooms that thrive is trust. So trusting, happy relationships inspire that vibrant, engaged learning that we want to see from our students. It's so, so important. And we, as the teachers in the classroom, we design that space and we create or cultivate the conditions in which students will engage with us. It's not enough that they are compliant and sit quietly and don't ask any questions. That's not vibrant, engaged learning. That's not full of enthusiasm and energy. And so trust helps us develop those conditions, because when we trust, when we believe that the people we're learning with are going to keep us safe and allow us to fail without shame, then we do more. We exceed beyond our own expectations. And that is absolutely critical for developing the capacity of our students to change the world. So trust in schools or in any organization is a bi-directional relationship, and schools will have trust between teachers and each other, between principals and teachers, or administrators and teachers. And today we're going to focus on the trust between teachers and students. So let's begin with what is trust. Dr. Megan Shannon Moran from the College of William & Mary in Virginia is a colleague, a friend, a mentor, an inspiration. She has written a lot about trust. She's written a book called Trust Matters, and I recommend it to everybody. And she defines trust through her research as the willingness to be vulnerable based on the confidence that the other person is benevolent, honest, open, reliable, and competent. We're going to explore each of these words for just a moment. But let's talk about vulnerability first. So trust is the willingness to make yourself vulnerable to another person. And that vulnerability is something that we often protect ourselves from. We want to protect ourselves from the shame that comes if we possibly make a mistake or make an error or fail in some way. We don't want to be vulnerable. And so trust is very important, because we don't really have true learning without vulnerability. But if we're protecting ourselves from vulnerability and we're keeping a wall up, then we aren't getting the deep learning that leads to really new innovations and new expressions of creativity. So now let's think about benevolence, honesty, openness, reliability, and competence. Benevolence first. Benevolence shows up as kindness in our classrooms, and benevolence can show up in all different ways. Kindness shows up in how we talk to our students, how we interact with them, how we show interest in them, and how we're attentive to their needs before they ask. So for one example of what that looked like, I worked in a school where many of our students came from poor backgrounds. It was a public school in the city of Norfolk, Virginia. And these students didn't have a lot, and they often did not have breakfast. And so I kept in my classroom, I kept bread and peanut butter. And students knew that if they were hungry, they needed to eat, and that was there for them. Nobody took advantage of that opportunity. Nobody was greedy. Nobody took more than they needed, because I believed and I explained that that was there when they needed to get rid of the distraction in their stomach. If their stomach is growling, that's distracting them from learning. Now, you all may not have students who come to school hungry, or maybe you do, I don't know. But there's other ways to express kindness. I had a student once at an independent school where I worked, where students definitely did not come to school hungry, and that student did not like my class at all, was not connecting with me or the material. And rather than get angry or frustrated with the student, I asked the student to come meet me after school for a conversation. Not detention, not punishment, just come talk with me. And as I listened to the student said, this class isn't important to me. It doesn't matter to my future. And so I asked the student, well, what do you like? What are you interested in? What do you want to be when you grow up? Because it's my job as the teacher to help the student see the connections. And so as I listened to the student tell me about what he wanted to be, then I was able to say, well, here's how science relates to what you want to do. And it may not be your favorite subject, but here's how it's relevant. Never had any trouble with that student moving forward. It was a very powerful conversation, and it helped change the situation. I could have gone down the path of detention and punishment and critique and all of those things, but what would that have got me? Not very much. The students still would hate my class even more. And it was much better to bring that student into the opportunity to engage with material that could be meaningful to him. So honesty. How does honesty show up in our classrooms? If you want to be honest, be true. And if you want to be true, be yourself. Be authentic. And that authenticity about who you are and what you say you are and how you behave, those things need to align. They need to be the same, as close to possible. I had a student who was making noises in class, and it was distracting. And it was early in the school year, and I took that student aside, and I said, why are you making those noises? I need to understand where that noise-making urge is coming from, because we need to address that. And her answer was, to me, I make noises when I'm bored. That was a problem for me, because I don't design a boring class. And so I said to her, okay, it's boring. I need to hear that. I can tell you honestly that I don't want you to be bored in my class. What do I need to do differently so that you're not bored? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, what? You don't need to do anything differently. And I said, well, I must, because if you are bored, then something isn't working well for you. And how are we going to fix that problem? And so she told me some things that she really liked. She loved art. She loved drawing. She loved making cartoons. She actually was hilarious, so her cartoons were always very funny. And I gave her choices, not all the time, but some of the time, to express her learning through art. And that made all the difference. There was no more noise in that classroom. And so the way honesty might show up for you in your classes might be different than that example. But we just share an example from my own experience, because that's what I can speak about best. So openness. Openness is about being willing to share who you are, to tell you a little bit more about myself, to be open to answering questions that you might have about who I am. And with our students, that's really important, because they're curious about who we are, and they want to know why we feel the things that we feel. I had a class that met after lunch, and it was a smaller class, and they were 10th graders in a 9 through 12 school. And the class wasn't going well. The whole class, it wasn't one person. The whole class just didn't engage. They weren't excited to be there. They seemed tired, and they seemed like they didn't care about the material. And I was working so hard to make it fun for them, and I was used to students talking and being happy and expressing some level of vibrancy. And so one day I said, I don't know what to do about this. Either I'm going to have to start lecturing for the whole time because my activities keep flopping. They won't talk to each other. They're not engaging. Or I'm going to have to be angry with them. I just wasn't quite sure. What I decided to do was to ask them what was happening. So I set aside the biology content for that day. It was less important than figuring out how to make our class community. Honestly, I told them I was uncomfortable with how the class was working. And I told them that, if you all don't engage, then I don't think that you're learning. If you're not willing to talk about the material, if you're not willing to do the activities, if you think they're stupid, then I need to understand that because I need to teach you differently then, because we have to have you learning. The material is important. Your futures depend on you being vibrant, engaged learners. So how do we help you become that? And they all sat there and looked at me, and I'm very comfortable with silence, so I sat there and looked back at them. Finally, one of them spoke up and said, very quietly, "We're all new. We don't know each other." And then I was like, oh, of course, you're 10th graders in a 9th grade biology class. That means you transferred to this school. And yes, you're all new and you don't know each other. We can fix that problem. And then I started answering the many questions that they had about the school and the rules and the norms. And we got to know each other. And it was a wonderful conversation that, again, transformed that classroom. Reliability is about being predictable. Our students want to know that we are who we say we are, that we practice honesty, that we practice integrity. They want to know that we have systems and processes in place that they can follow consistently, that we will do what we say we're going to do, and that we will keep our promises to them. And my promise to my students was that I would work very hard to make that place, our classroom, a place that they would choose to come to, even if they weren't required to be there. And what I needed from them is that when they came to class, they would do their best to be ready to engage and to learn. And I really don't like wasting time. And so I would write on the board all the materials that they needed, and I would give them something to get started. An activity, a question, something for them to think about. And if they came to the classroom door, they would peek in between classes. What do I need for class today? They would run to their lockers, they would come back, and they would all be ready and engaged to go by the time the bell rang. And I was very consistent about that expectation early on and helped them see that it helped us maximize our class time. We didn't waste class time. And so the learning was more productive. Competence. It's the intersection between our attitudes, our behavior, our knowledge, and our skills. And we want to have our attitudes align with what we say we're going to be doing. We want our skills to match that, and we want our knowledge to engage with that as well. So, for example, I say that I design a democratic classroom. I say that I want my students to be engaged. I say that I want my students to challenge me and to ask a lot of questions. Well, if I don't practice that in the way that I teach, then that's a problem. And so it's important to align all of those things. And to the extent that we have this great alignment, then we will communicate to our students that we're competent, that we're prepared and ready to do what needs to be done. So the research tells us that trust really does matter, that where trust is high, students feel they belong. And where students feel that they belong, they're more willing to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is hard. We all, even in high trust environments, are likely to protect ourselves a little bit from vulnerability. However, as we maintain and continue to develop high trusting environments, vulnerability is less hard. We take more risks if we're willing to be vulnerable because we're willing to fail and we're not afraid of feeling shame about that. And this is all research-based. This is what the findings tell us students do when they're in high trust environments. They explore new concepts. They engage more deeply with their learning. which means that they perform on those tests. So it's critical that as teachers, designers, managers, leaders of our classroom, that we design the space in which trust develops. And we as teachers like to be in trusting environments too. And we perform better when we feel that we're in a high trust environment. If our administration, if our principals trust us, we perform better as well. We're willing to take more risks. We're willing to go above and beyond, to give more of ourselves. And we believe in ourselves much more. We have greater efficacy about the work that we're doing. We believe that we can make a difference. So these are all very important outcomes that come from high trust environments. So just in review, trust is about benevolence, honesty, openness, reliability, and competence.